Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of cinema or sci-fi, your master of fun and wonder, your chancellor of cheerfulness, your archbishop of Banterbury, and of course, lest we forget, oh, I love doing this, your existential Mr. Rogers, whatever the heck that means, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am, of course, I'm here with you once again for another episode of Robservations, a show about something. This is, in fact, Robservations episode number 388, and I am Robcasting to you from the Robservatory. You imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. Great to be here yet again on a Friday. We're all still shuttered in at home. I hope everyone is. Luckily, we are starting to see perhaps a change in our fortunes, which is terrific, which means people are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and it's all working out. Although, I'm still getting people sending me David Icke videos about the New World Order and how all of this is just a smokescreen. But I tend not to believe that. But that's just me. I do still, however, cling to my hope that all of this entire global pandemic is actually something that we're supposed to shelter at home because our extraterrestrial overlords are going to arrive in Independence Day sized ships. They're going to take their positions over every city in the world and not destroy us, but hopefully exploit us in some way that makes us better. No, I'm just kidding. I want to point out right away before I go any further that I'm not trying to do this particular episode to exploit the situation that we're in or to in any way, shape, or form dishonor anyone whose loved ones have either passed away or are currently sick, nor do I want to besmirch the holy days going on, Easter, and of course Passover, or anything. However, I'm bringing this story to light because, in a way, I found it surprisingly uplifting, if only because it's a way, once again, it harks back to the showmanship era of Hollywood, like the old William Castles, and also because I used to work for this person that I want to talk about, who I've always kind of liked, no matter what. So I'm going to bring this story to light. And I wanted to talk about that, but I wanted to give a disclaimer first and foremost because, again, I don't think anybody should be making light of the situation that we find ourselves in. However, I do think that humor can always be called for in almost any situation because, if nothing else, making somebody laugh or putting a smile on someone's face can never be a bad thing. Anyway, that said, why don't we just get right into it? First of all, yes, as everyone knows, John Campea is doing a telethon over on his channel now. I will be there at 4 p.m. today. So people have asked me, why aren't you on John's show? I'm going to be on John's show at 4 p.m. today. So have no fear about that. So there is a movie that is debuting, I think it's debuting today or tomorrow, I believe, on Shudder, called Corona Zombies. And it was made by Charlie Band, the impresario behind Empire Pictures, Wizard Video, if you go back to the 80s, and of course Full Moon Entertainment. Full Moon made the Subspecies movies, the Trancers movies, although not the original. I think the original was an Empire movie. Doll Man versus Demonic Toys, all of the Puppet Master movies. And I actually had the great privilege of working for Charlie Band at Full Moon Entertainment in the early 90s. In 93 and 94, where I did I got my first editorial job. I worked with Peter Don't You Shoot Your Eye Out Billingsley on the movie Arcade. We were charged, I mean, our credits now are additional editors, but we basically were tasked with the Herculean job of taking a movie, Arcade, that had been sitting on a shelf unreleasable and making it releasable. And I worked on it for over 6 months. And it was my first editorial job, and I learned just about everything I needed to know about film post-production while working on that process of working on Arcade for my good friend Dan Schweiger, who was given the task by Charlie Band himself. And of course, Charlie Band had to approve all of our work. And over the last, the last decade, he's had his financial woes, his ups and downs, but he's brought Full Moon back again from the grave, which seems sort of apropos. And he's been making the movies like Evil Bong and things like that. Well, Corona Zombies, which is about to hit, was made in a month. And I think that as far as Hollywood is concerned, it is a fascinating tale that I wouldn't have known anything about aside from Chris Alexander's Facebook post from 6 hours ago, which I want to share with you because it is fascinating. So here, Chris, I turn the floor over to Chris Alexander. By the way, he posted this on Facebook, so I assume it's public. So Chris, all apologies to you, but it's from Chris Alexander on Facebook. I'm stealing it from him and sharing it with you here. I hope you all find that acceptable. I'm giving him full credit. Chris Alexander, take it away. I promised I would tell the insane story of the making of Corona Zombies. Here it is. On Friday, March 13th at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I get a call from Charles Band. Charlie, dude, I want to do a What's Up Tiger Lily comedy redub of a gory Italian horror movie and poke fun at the way the media and government are handling this Corona thing. I want to call it Corona Zombies. I'm already working on the poster. What do you think a good movie would be to use? I consider this latest bit of lunacy, as I am more than used to these sorts of left-field calls from Charlie. I knew we couldn't use a Fulci film, too sacred, and too gothic. Burial Ground, maybe? The ghouls eat the wealthy, and there's plenty of room to make social comment, but Burial Ground is too awesome and creepy to make fun of. Then it hit me. Bruno Mattei. Hell of the Living Dead. Me. Hell of the Living Dead, that's the one. It's got a virus in a lab, an outbreak, a zombie rat, stupid government officials, and an even stupider SWAT team. Stupid zombies, insane and stupid gore, questionable stock footage, and even though it has a big cult following, it's pretty disreputable. And that borrowed goblin music and Charlie Band. Sounds great! Is it in the public domain? Me, Chris. No. There are no public domain Italian zombie movies. In fact, you already licensed it for streaming. It's on the Full Moon Features channel, and I presume that we got it from William Lustig, or as they know him in the industry, Bill Lustig. Bill Lustig is the impresario behind the Blue Underground video label. He also directed Maniac, the Joe Spinell movie Maniac, and he also did Maniac Cop, amongst other things. So he also has bought movies and brought them to America on his own video label. Charlie Band says, okay, let me watch it. 30 minutes later, Charlie calls me back. Charlie, it's perfect. It's awesome. Now, do you think Bill owns it? Maybe Variety Films in Italy? Do you know who might have the rights? Me, Chris. Well, I'm pretty sure the last imprint that put it out in any format was Blue Underground, so I wouldn't be surprised if Bill Lustig still has it. Call him. 10 minutes later, Charlie calls me back. Dude, Bill owns it outright. He loves the idea. He's licensing it to me. We're going to make this thing. I want to release it on April 10th and only on our channel. I'll send the poster when it's done. 2 hours later, I get the poster. That poster is then released. It goes viral all over the internet. Some are laughing, some are confused, still others are angry, citing it as insensitive to a real, lethal global crisis. Monday, March 16th, 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. I'm on a call with Charlie and the other members of the Full Moon staff. LA is on the cusp of a full-blown lockdown, with some staff members already working from home. One key member, one of the writers, is in traction from an existing ailment that's left him bedridden. Charlie Band, dudes, this little idea has caught fire. We need to expand this a little bit. I want to shoot some new footage and make this thing a little bit crazier, funnier, weirder. Let's brainstorm. In that call, we brainstormed and laughed lots. And by the end of it, there was a story. Well, such as it is. A couple of days later, the movie was cast. Because of the impending lockdown, the shoot had to be a single day, with only 4 to 5 people on set. Charlie directed it. Then everyone went home, locked their doors, and they've been there ever since. Over the next week, a script was completed. 19 voice actors from around the LA area were hired to read and record the new hell dialogue while quarantined at home. Then, all of the footage and audio was sent to our editor in Las Vegas, also quarantined at home. The cut was then sent to LA for a sound mix. Our designer, naturally, also quarantined at home. Charlie, while also quarantined at home, oversaw all of this post-production madness via Skype and file sharing. The movie was finished Thursday morning. Yesterday. And you can watch it now, starting today, only on the Full Moon channel and app. Some of you have voiced your open repulsion that, in the midst of a pandemic that's killing hundreds of thousands around the world, an entertainment called Corona Zombies even exists. I get that. What's happening to us all now in real life is terrifying, depressing, and tragic. And if I wasn't a small part of the mechanics of this insane experiment, I might raise an eyebrow too. However, as someone who lives and breathes exploitation and down-market horror movie history, I know that all of this sort of entertainment riffs on tragedy or taboo. An audience usually looks into it because the subject that's being exploited doesn't directly affect them. Young audiences thrill to say Pet Sematary, but a parent who has lost a child? Not so much. Slasher movies are fine, unless your wife or husband has been murdered. In the case of this asshole virus from hell, it literally affects everyone. Their lives, their livelihoods, their families, the world. We're all affected, even more savagely than others. Some more savagely than others. But to anyone who cites Corona Zombies as some sort of monstrous attack on morals and good taste, I say this. Of course it is! At a time when so many in the film industry are out of work, this little thing employed dozens of people who learned to create product in a unique way. From idea to release, this thing took a staggering 28 days. And in parentheses, he says 28 days later, to become real. Had that ever been done before? It's a movie about a pandemic made during a pandemic. A movie about quarantine made in quarantine. And as such, it's been a joy to see this silly, satirical, trash exploitation comedy come to life. It's streaming now, and it is often very funny and clever, especially if you're a Hell of the Living Dead fan. In fact, considering good old Bruno Mattei used to insert all manner of other movies and stock footage into his deranged schlock, I'd say he'd absolutely approve. Watch it or don't. Either way, stay home, stay safe, and have as good a weekend as you can. Now, it's funny because I do believe in this trailer, and I've never seen the actual film it's based on or they used. I think in the actual trailer there's stock footage from Dawn of the Dead, if I do say so. Here is the trailer for it, which I am putting in the live chat. Now, look, I found this whole story to be amusing and interesting, but what I also thought about it was, in a way, it's very entrepreneurial. And as Chris pointed out, yes, it was done. Talk about turning lemons into lemonade. This sort of defines that. I mean, obviously, Charlie Band has been a movie producer for the better part of, more than 40 years now. And he is a master at doing this kind of thing. Charlie Band was the guy who would make posters for movies like Decapitron and take them to Cannes. Like, I used to love reading the Cannes film market issues of the trades back in the 80s because Charlie would make posters for movies he hadn't made yet and sell the movie based on the poster. I mean, he is that kind of a guy. And when we were working at Full Moon, he was making a movie a month. It was a great place to work, and I learned a lot. I mean, I only wish he could have kept it going. Let's just say his financial practices were sometimes dubious at best. But it was a great place to work in the early 90s. I loved my time there. I got to work with Dave Parker, who I'm working with now on the Hills Run Red Blu-ray. Dave just finished turning in his last piece for the disc, which I watched. It's Dave Parker and Dave Scout talking about the genesis of the Hills Run Red. It's really terrific, and I think you guys are going to be happy. But I read this and I think, gosh, Dave Parker and I were doing work back in 1993 together. And in 2008, Dave and I went to Bulgaria and produced The Hills Run Red. And now I'm reading an article about Charlie Band in 2020. And I think, that's kind of fun. And it's, in a way, it's something that I found to be fairly uplifting. Now, I too had, as you know, I've been working on in a very small capacity, admittedly, on a Netflix show that'll be debuting fourth quarter. And, I've been doing just a little bit of editing on it, but we did it remotely. It was the first time we had 3 people, 4 total, and I was editing here, and I had 3 people watching, sharing the screen so they could see what I was doing, and it was really interesting. Like with the technology that we have available to us with post-production, for instance, all of my Hills Run Red pieces that I've been doing, I've delivered 10 total. I cut them. I edited them, obviously, on the same computer you're watching me on. Well, that I'm broadcasting to you from. Would you say broadcasting? That I'm streaming to you from right now. I also do all my work. So I created over 2.5 hours of programming that you'll be able to watch on the Blu-ray right here. I mixed it in 5.1 surround sound. Again, all right here. And then I sent it when it was finished, and I finished the pieces, and they're all in HD. And then I sent them up through the portal where you deliver to Shout Factory so they can get the pieces and put them on the discs. And I did it all here. I didn't even see anyone. Nobody else was involved in my production process. I only had to go rent a deck right before we were sequestered away last month. I don't have an HDV deck anymore, which was what the material was originally shot on, HDV. The format. And I didn't even know these tapes that all this material came from are 12 years old. I didn't know what shape the material was going to be in. It turned out to be great. So aside from going out of my house and renting a deck and digitizing all of the material that was shot 12 years ago in 2008 in Bulgaria and that I have hung on to, I mean, it all got done. And it's amazing what our technological future has brought to us. And the fact that I'm still able to do this, it's pretty neat. And hopefully, if you're collecting still physical media and you have any interest in low-budget exploitation movies, you'll be able to pick up The Hills Run Red when it comes out on June 16th. But I did like this story about Full Moon. I thought it was great, and it's just like Charlie in the finest tradition of the schlockmeisters who are able to create these kinds of low-budget. I wouldn't necessarily say, look, I'm not recommending this movie by any stretch of the imagination, not at all. But if it's your thing, if you like, Sharknado and things like that, maybe. If you've ever seen What's Up Tiger Lily, if you know what that is, where Woody Allen brought a film from the Asian market, and of course he dubbed all of it. It could be a lot of fun, and it is streaming right now on the Full Moon channel. So that's some craziness right there. Anyway, I've been getting letters, and I am thankful to everyone for writing such great letters, and today is no exception. And this one, I gotta say, this was a letter that I kind of dug, and this comes from fellow imagination connoisseur. Well, it did come from fellow imagination connoisseur. This comes from James Rudge. Hello, Rob. I hope you're doing well. With all of the bleakness going, I've decided to write about some things I've enjoyed in the last 2 weeks. The first subject is about my viewing of Citizen Kane for the first time in my life. For years now, I've been wanting to watch that movie ever since I heard Orson Welles portray the Planet Eater, Unicron, in the animated Transformers movie. But every time I wanted to watch Citizen Kane, everyone said, "No, it's a boring movie and you won't like it." Well, after finally seeing it, I can say that I loved it. From the start to the end of the film, I was hooked to the story of Charles Foster Kane and his quest for obtaining what he lost in childhood. I highly recommend this masterpiece of cinema to everyone who hasn't seen it, and maybe a future episode of Elizaviews whining about movies if Elizabeth hasn't seen it already. Well, let me tell you, man, James, I've got a huge box set of Citizen Kane. I love Citizen Kane. As a matter of fact, it was the very first Criterion Laserdisc I ever bought in 1984. The CAV version they put out, Criterion put out Citizen Kane and King Kong. I had them both. A second subject is about a fan-made 3D animated miniseries on YouTube called Astartes. Is it Astartes? I'm sure I'm saying this wrong. Astartes? It is a 5-part miniseries set in the Warhammer 40,000 universe with a total runtime of 13 minutes. 13 minutes. Astartes follows a tactical squad of Adeptus Astartes, or Space Marines as they are more commonly known as, investigating unusual activity on a ship. This miniseries shows the audience the quiet, brutal efficiency of the Space Marines' methods, whereas many other fan projects and some official works have depicted the Space Marines as incompetent screaming lunatics. What makes Astartes even more special, however, is that it is done entirely by one guy. A singular imagination connoisseur has made this beautiful animated series in the span of nearly 2 years. Wow. Talk about the power of a fan's passion. If you haven't seen Astartes, then I highly recommend it, even if you're not versed in the 40K setting. It both shows what makes the Space Marines so terrifying and a fan's passion for something they love. Well, let me just say, I have watched it. Alec Peters, that I was working on Axnar with, actually kind of got me, didn't get me into it because I didn't really start playing it, but started buying me their weekly magazine and showed me a lot of the miniatures, and he has a huge collection of Warhammer 40K stuff. It's really cool. And I wanted to have like the Harlequins. I wanted to make an army of Harlequins, but I mean, between everything else I collect, the Hot Toys figures and whatever, I can't even, I could never get into Warhammer. I mean, I watched these guys would come over and they have these huge, in our studio, these huge tabletop, I mean, they gigantic, like football field size battle. I was like, I couldn't even. But I will say this, if you look up this on YouTube, I watched all 5 episodes. It's amazing. Now, again, I don't know what the legality of it is because I know that Warhammer 40K has been litigious and all that, but it's really cool, beautiful work. It really preserved the look of Warhammer 40K, and I can't recommend it highly enough. And James continues. Speaking of love, for the final topic, I would like to write about my stepmom, who sadly passed away recently. She was an imagination connoisseur like the rest of us, and her love for all things fantasy is what led to my close relationship with her. We would discuss all things about Star Wars, the MCU, Transformers, Doctor Who, Lord of the Rings, which was her favorite movie trilogy and books, and we would spend hours discussing Game of Thrones theories when the show was at its peak. She was a kind and loving woman who was always there for myself and my brothers and sisters when we needed her. And most importantly, she brought joy to my dad's life. To commemorate her life, I have been painting one of my 40K models, an Imperial Knight. Think of a giant mecha in the shape of a medieval knight, in her favorite colors. It may not be much to some, but I know she would have loved it. Once again, I must thank you, Rob, for being the custodian of light in our darkest hours. Your videos always bring me joy and happiness during the worst bouts of my depression. Thanks again for everything, James Rudge. Well, James, what a lovely letter, and your stepmom was certainly lucky to have you, and you obviously were lucky to have her. You know, My parents were not imagination connoisseurs themselves. My mom's still alive. By the way, my mother is going to be 81 years old tomorrow. If you were watching the show a year ago, I had my mom. She fell out of a chair, believe it or not. But I had my mom on the show a year ago tomorrow. And I had flown up with Elizabeth to go to a convention in Wenatchee where I met Captain Brad, an imagination connoisseur par excellence. It's been a year since Captain Brad and Elizabeth and I met. And he, of course, is a Washington State ferry captain. One day I told him he said I could drive the boat. I'd love to drive it in a whole like going somewhere and just drive it in it and put it in a 360-degree circle and keep going. How dope would that be? I've loved the Washington State ferry system since I was a little kid. And even now, getting on ferries always thrills me. It's always thrilling. I love it. I could spend a whole day just going back and forth on ferries. And I met Captain Brad a year ago. So how cool is that? And Captain Brad has a pretty dope home theater and man cave. But I would say to you, James, when you finish your Warhammer figure, please send me a picture and I'll put it on the show. We'll talk about it. And maybe, perhaps, if you could write a little bit more about your relationship with your mom, and I could read it as I show the picture as the graphic, which I think would be delightful. So thank you very much for writing in, and I'm sure your stepmother would be honored, and I bet she would have loved to have seen your Warhammer figure. By the way, those Warhammer figures, and they don't just make figures, but they make model kits, the thing is, I get so obsessed with certain things that I'll just start wanting to buy them all. I can't. My collecting, I can't get into anything new. Nothing new. It's Star Wars, it's Hot Toys figures, Star Trek, and superheroes. It's too much. I can't do it. As much as I've dipped my finger into 12 scale figures with the Mezco stuff, but only because they're movie related. Diabolic, The Warriors, Clockwork Orange. But that's it, man. I was gonna be like, well, maybe I can get all the X-Men in 12 scale. No, I cannot. I must stop. They're making it 6 scale Ecto 1 from Ghostbusters. It's like $1,400. That's it, man. I covet it. And even my friend Chuck, not Chuck Bender. Chuck Bender actually was a producer on The Hills Run Red. No, my friend Cliff I was talking to about this. Cliff Stevenson, or as we affectionately call him, Nerd Santa. Remember, Cliff Stevenson has a great documentary on the new Blu-ray of Knives Out. Cliff is also a 6th scale figure collector. He has a great collection. And while we each have the 6 scale Ghostbusters that Blitzway put out, we were we were talking about whether or not, because Cliff has the DeLorean from Back to the Future. I don't have the DeLorean. I have Tim Burton's Batmobile in 6 scale. It's huge. But I didn't get the DeLorean. But I want the DeLorean one day. But we were discussing whether or not we're going to get the Ecto 1. And he was like, it's just too damn big. I mean, it's really huge. I don't know where I would put it here in the Robservatory, but it's definitely something that I would want to get. But I feel like I should just build all the unbuilt model kits I have first, rockets. I don't know. That's what happens. But either way, James, when you finish that Warhammer figure, send it in to me. By the way, something that I should mention to everyone, there is, with WonderCon would have started, WonderCon that San Diego Comic-Con puts on, but it used to be in San Francisco, and they moved it to Anaheim, which is a bummer because I used to love to go to San Francisco to go to WonderCon. I've been going to WonderCon, well, I was going to WonderCon since the 90s when it was an independently run convention, I think in Oakland? Was it in Oakland? Anyway, but there are some very savvy folks that have decided to have an online convention, and they've asked me to be a part of it. The Mainframe Comic-Con, it's going to happen on April 25th and 26th. I guess I'll be moderating some panels, which should be exciting. I don't know how it's quite all going to work, but they asked me if I, in fact, would do it, and I said, absolutely, count me in, because why not? So anybody that is interested, put this on your calendar, April 25th and 26th. I know people like Kevin Smith are participating, so it should be quite fun. And I'm very much looking forward to participating, which I think is going to be great. And again, what a great idea to have stuff like this while all of this is going on. And I'm happy to be part of it, and I'm happy to promote. So that's great. I think it's fantastic. Now let me jump over and see what you guys and gals and gentle beings and people from all over are saying. Let's see. Willow says, there's a Canadian coronavirus movie about a group of people that are stuck in an elevator, and one of them, a Chinese woman, starts coughing. Have you seen the trailer? I honestly think it looks pretty bad. I have not seen it, but I don't like the fact that it was the Chinese woman who starts coughing. You can't blame a whole ethnicity over an emergent pathogen, because there could be emergent pathogens coming from everywhere. So, and by the way, most of the coronavirus cases, well, the disease might have first manifested in China, but as we found out, or as we know now, even in New York, most of the coronavirus did come in from Europe, even though it probably came from China. But it could have started in the Amazon, it could have started in Africa. We just never know where these pathogens come from. So it probably is pretty bad, Willow. I don't know anything about it. I have not seen the trailer, but yeah. I'm sure it probably isn't so great if they made it so quickly. I would stick to Corona Zombies. I think that sounds probably better. Chairman Mao is here. Chairman Mao says, I liked your recommendations about 4K films to get from the other day. Shot on films do benefit the most, and I don't mind grain, but I found the grain on the Crouching Tiger 4K to be heavy to the point of distracting. In fairness, I've only watched the first few minutes of it, and those are kind of dark. Hopefully the outdoor scenes look better, but just curious as to why it's so grainy compared to The Matrix, which came out around the same time, and that looks amazing. Well, it really depends on here's the thing. Films that were shot photochemically, there's a lot of different factors when it goes into things like grain pattern that you can see. Film stocks are one. Kodak is very different from Fuji, and the lenses contribute. The amount of light, obviously. So sometimes, like you'll notice in a lot of effect shots, like there's shots in Close Encounters on 4K or shots on Ghostbusters on 4K where you'll see different grain patterns from shot to shot, because when effects companies are shooting, they're not using the same lenses necessarily that the DP is using on the whole film. So it really depends how it's shot. I remember Crouching Tiger looking pretty damn good, but you never know. It really depends. And the thing is, what people forget is when you go to the movie theater, you would tend to see this as well. You'd see these grain patterns. We just don't notice as much when we're home, because at home, when you're watching something on your home theater, if you're watching, say, a 4K Pixar disc, obviously there's no grain at all. It looks pristine and perfect. So it's a different experience than if you're watching something that was captured photochemically. And I think that that's always something we need to be mindful of. Now, when I was recommending 4K films, I was trying to think of what are the best photochemical films that I know were restored. If you have a full negative, see, now a lot of our effects sequences are done in 2K, and the movies are actually finished in 2K because of that, and then they're blown up on 4K for 4K home video releases. So that's a whole different experience. And to me, I think the films that benefit most from a 4K release are those photochemical films that were created before the digital age, where everything, you have a cut negative that you can go in and scan at 4K. To me, that's when you get the best results. And that's why I recommend movies like Blade Runner, like, well, The Matrix, again, that was filmed, it was finished on film. So you're getting a bump up from a photochemical source. And Die Hard, same thing. Die Hard was always, in my mind, never looked great on home video. It always looked sort of smeary, because Jan de Bont's photography, with the way he used diffusion and his lenses and lighting, was very difficult to recreate on home video. That's why I felt that the 4K disc of Die Hard was such a revelation, because finally, in my mind, it looked correct. That's why I'm so excited about getting Basic Instinct. I love Basic Instinct, the movie, but it also has never looked as good as it should look on home video because of this very thing. Jan de Bont also shot Basic Instinct. Same DP of Basic Instinct and Die Hard. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that on home entertainment. So the things that I try and recommend are the things that I think are the most genuine. 2001, amazing on 4K. It's just absolutely astonishing, and I can't wait to get all of the other Kubrick films. They're not flashy necessarily, but they're beautifully shot. And what I would give for Barry Lyndon in 4K, whoo boy, would I love Barry Lyndon. Bob Koal's here, and he says, what do you know of Something Weird Video? First learned of it on the Real Wild Cinema Show hosted by Sandra Bernhard. Notice they've paired with Full Moon on streaming. I'll confess to having a couple of Go-Go Girl collections from Something Weird Video. Something Weird Video has been around for a very long time, and they're one of those labels that were acquiring these kinds of movies that were essentially no one was ever going to be seeing ever again, and which I think is great. And there are a couple video labels that also specialize in stuff that Something Weird does. I'm a huge fan of Vinegar Syndrome. Two releases of theirs that I really liked were Liquid Sky, which I thought they would never find the negative, and Body Melt that Elizabeth and I have talked about. But yeah, I mean, I like I said, I like softcore Euro porn, Euro trashy porn. If it's not, I love Go-Go Girl movies. I love all that stuff because it's so removed from our world today. It's such a insight and doorway into the past and where we were at in terms of our mores and what we believed in. So I can't get enough of that stuff. So I do not hold it against you, Bob, that you have stuff from Something Weird Video. They've been around doing so yes, check it out. Mukbang Reviews sends in a super chat and says, today's Prince song is The Cross. Black day, lonely night, no love, no hope in sight. Don't cry, for he's coming. Don't die without knowing the cross. Wow, 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 wow. Anyway, I love The Cross, Mukbang. It's one of my favorite Prince songs, and I, of course, am not a Christian, and I do love that song. We all have our problems. Some are big and some are small, man, and that is a perfect song going into Easter. No need to sing it. I love singing Prince songs. It's great when you read the lyrics, though. Love your shows. Be well. Well, Mukbang, thank you for your continued support, and every time you send me in a Prince song, I love it. But The Cross is, it's actually a spiritual song, obviously. But man, there's some great down and dirty Prince guitar licks on that song. It's so great. I really, 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 really like it. I forgot Calvin Bose sent in not Calvin Bose. No, it was Biddleborg sent in a tip and said, speaking of impossible premises, have you seen the 4400? Yes, I have. I watched it religiously when I was a kid on the USA Network. Did you enjoy it? Does it fit your criteria for an impossible premise? If so, did you find the answer to their premise satisfying? I wouldn't consider the 4400 an impossible premise. I would consider it straight up science fiction. The 4400, if memory serves, it's 3 seasons. I watched it all. Basically, it's about 444 people, or 4,400 people that were returned from the past into our present. The past and our present? I don't remember. And some of them had powers and they were here. We didn't know why they were here. But to me, that was straight up science fiction. And as the show, I don't want to ruin the whole show because I don't want to say what the premise was. But ultimately, you basically had what ended up being multiple factions. I don't think that's ruining anything. By saying multiple factions from the future that wanted to ensure our future went a certain way. And I that they did that with Eric McCormack, who was in Free Enterprise, was producing a show from Canada called Travelers that I was actually a big fan of as well, that had a similar feel to the 4400, but it also dealt with these future factions manipulating the timeline. And I was bummed out. Netflix bought it wholeheartedly away from the Canadians, and they only did a third season and ended it. But it ended okay. But the 4400 I liked. Promycin is the people who had Promycin. It was interesting. I thought it was really interesting, and I liked it. It ended on a cliffhanger, though, and maybe they'll do like a TV movie or something. I don't know, because I think that would be good. That would be good. I enjoy that. Stubble McShave is here, and he says, I heard that Dan Murrell was leaving Screen Junkies to starting his own channel. It would be great to see you two collaborate on something. I also think an 8-hour show is a bit long if you haven't got lots of prepared material. 4 hours is enough for your 400th show. Yeah, but 4 hours is only 200 and some odd minutes, right? I'm going to do 400 minutes, I think. But yes, what I'm planning to do is I'm going to try and do a lot of interviews, like Skype interviews and things with people now. So it'll be 8 hours, but I will have pre-prepared, pre-edited packages that I will show during that time. And by the way, I invite anybody to send me any videos that they care to make for me for the 400th show. So please do that, and I would be happy to show them on the show. As far as Dan Murrell is concerned, for those of you who don't know, Dan Murrell was a big part of Screen Junkies and Honest Trailers, and he announced yesterday that he is leaving to start his own concern. What that is, the details were not. Maybe they did. I did see the announcement on the show. I watched the announcement on the show that he made yesterday. I'm a huge fan of Dan Murrell. I don't know him that well. My only contact with him has been through the Schmodown, but he is just a lovely guy. I think he's really talented. I think he's incredibly smart. Also, his girlfriend, Mara, I'm a huge fan of as well. I think the two of them, but Dan is just, in the YouTube pundit space, I think Dan Murrell it doesn't get any better than Dan Murrell. I would, look, if you wanted me to do something with him, I absolutely would. I'd be more than happy to collaborate with him in any way, shape, and form. And I absolutely think that whatever he's going to do, it's going to be great, and it's going to be worth experiencing. Speaking of which, I wasn't going to share this, but I think I'm going to share it. So this morning, I got a DM via Twitter from Jeremy at Geeks and Gamers. And, I took a lot of shit from a lot of people for going on his show, but he asked me to go on his show. And Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers sent me this DM. He says, "Hey, Robert, I've been meaning to send you this message for weeks. I just wanted to say I appreciate you. I know we disagree big time on politics, but you've always been nothing but respectful to me, and that's hard to find these days. You're a good guy. I hope you and your family are doing well." Now, that was completely unsolicited. I don't know, Jeremy, he took the time to send that to me, and I'll tell you what I wrote him back. Here's what I wrote him back. I wrote, "Great hearing from you. I too hope you and your family are holding up. Many, many thanks for the thoughts. It's okay we differ politically. We live in different parts of the country, so political differences are to be expected, but we're fans. We share common interests, and that's where we come together. As you've just shown, we can have differences, but we can still have mutual respect. That's what's important. With your message to me, you've shown exactly what it means to be a great American. Again, many thanks, and your message means a great deal." So I gotta give it up for Jeremy. I woke up and read that, and it made my day. And I thought, this is what the extended imagination connoisseur community is all about. Now, I know, Jeremy, he's taken some shots at people I know and people I work with, just like we've taken shots at other people. I try not to make it personal. But I just thought, what a stand-up, nice thing to do, completely unsolicited. And so shouts out to Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers for literally that was the message. His message is what I woke up to today. And, it made me realize that during this time, I've been getting a few phone calls from people that I haven't talked to in a while. Just people calling up being like, hey, how's it going? What are you up to? I watch your show, or congratulations on this, or it's, and I just thought, it takes not very much time, but what a cool thing to just reach out to people and, friends you might have that you haven't talked to in a while, and just to drop in a message or a DM or a text or something and just say, hey, man, thinking about you. Hope you're holding up, and what's up? And I thought that was really, really nice of Jeremy and from Geeks and Gamers for doing that. And I want to thank him. That it really meant a lot. And it was unexpected. So thank you, sir. Very much appreciated. But yes, Dan Murrell, man, I'll tell you, Stubble, I'll do anything with that guy. If you want to see a great example of Dan Murrell's work, look up the honest trailers for Star Trek: The Next Generation. Man, you can see the love and the scholarship he put into that. It's a great example of the kind of work that Dan Murrell does. So I can't imagine to see what he does with his new concern. Very excited, and I'm sure, if he reached out to me, I would collaborate with him in a hot second. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, hopefully I can catch again. Hopefully I can catch the thing you're doing on the 25th or 26th. Fortunately, JordanCon online is 1 week earlier, so that shouldn't clash. Yeah, I don't know what JordanCon is. I'm sure I'll figure it out. Somebody will tell me all about it. Dirty Nerdy is here and sends in a tip and says, I built the DeLorean with all the mods, and I'm currently building the Ecto 1 and the T800. I think the Enterprise D is coming next year, and I'm definitely building that. More money than sense. I would imagine that you are talking about the Eagle Moss Ecto 1 and the DeLorean. I am currently getting the Aston Martin DB5 from Goldfinger from them, and I think it's like eighths, it's eighth scale. It's about this big. Wait, you can't even see that. It's about this big. I'm very impressed with it so far. I think I've got 40 of their releases. They're sent in chunks of 4, but now I really want to speed it up. You can get 8 at once because I'm tired of waiting. But I'm a huge fan. But if you're building the DeLorean, the T800, and the Enterprise D, I signed up to get the Enterprise D. But to tell you the truth, the pictures they had, as I looked at it, they didn't have any Aztecing on it. I'm hoping the reason it's taken so long, because it was supposed to come out in June. I think the reason they've pushed it, I guess, a year is to retool it and make it great. So I'm kind of hoping they'll do that. We shall see. Let me jump back to a letter. Let's see. What do I got here? I'm gonna wait on this one. This one's a long letter. That's how I'm gonna end today with a good one. Our man Omar 94, back again. Hi, Rob. I like reading about film, noticing how many companies are involved on just one movie alone now, from 1 to 4 production companies and sometimes 2 big studios distributing. As a kid, I always thought movies were made by just one studio alone. Everyone would go to a studio and the entire movie was made there. However, as I got older and I started reading up on the film, I realized that wasn't the case. But in classic Hollywood, that's how a lot of movies were made. People from writers, directors, actors, etc. would go to studios like Warner Brothers, RKO, Paramount, and work on the sound stages and backlots. Everything from pre-production to post-production was done there. Then each studio solely distributed its own movies. Why did everything change where other companies came and worked with a big studio to make movies? Each studio has the money to solely distribute and the space, such as backlots and sound stages, to do the production. Isn't it easier having everything done under one company like classic Hollywood? Thanks, and live long and prosper. Omar, great question. Simple answer, money. Back in the old days, studios would even have stars under contract, so stars could only make movies for them. Whether it was MGM, whether it was Warner Brothers, Universal, they would have contracts and put stars. And sometimes, stars would be contracted when they were young. and they were young, and they grew up under contract. So, wow, that's really cold water. Cold in my front teeth. And so that's how that all worked. But now, look, filmmaking and film financing is a global prospect. And a lot of the time, as I said, as we were talking about yesterday, so much money is involved that sometimes a film company one studio will take domestic distribution or North American distribution, and another studio will take European or Asian distribution. It's all to alleviate the costs, because now movies, especially big movies, you're talking 150, $200 million films. And if a studio's making, I don't know, Disney makes 8 to 10 movies a year, spending that kind of money, that is a lot of money. Disney pretty much holds on to everything, but that's a bad example. But a Universal or any other studio, Paramount, might split the risk. And so that's why. It's because things are so expensive now that they need, instead of going to a bank, you might have another production company that will come in and be like, say, an Alibaba or something. They'll kick in for the Asian rights, depending. It's basically because movies now are way, way, way more expensive. Look at Star Wars. I mean, Star Wars was basically made for $9 to $11 million. I know it was 1977, but now, a Star Wars movie costs $250 million. And that's a lot of money. I mean, Disney's footing the bill now, but it just, the world has changed, so we need studios just need more partners to pay, and that's the way it works. Multiple production companies and that kind of thing. Matthew Van Holten writes in and says, "Hey Rob, man, I miss going to movie theaters. Granted, this is a very minor gripe when compared to the worldwide suffering going on right now, but fully acknowledging that I found myself ruminating recently with the news that AMC is in serious trouble about wanting nothing more than to get my AMC app and go see my 3 movies this week with my A-list. Alas, the Hollywood movie-going experience is probably something most of us, your humble followers, Post-Geek Singularity acolytes even, have an abiding love for. And I've found even more so since the option has been taken away. My first movie memory was the original Star Wars. I was 4 and I barely remember the movie, but I remember going and the excitement of that experience. A year after that, my parents divorced, and ultimately we settled into an every other weekend visitation pattern with my dad. He was the movie buff of my folks, and almost every weekend he'd have us, we went to a movie. Anything. Sci-fi, action, adventure was fair game. So yes, Star Wars and Star Trek and Indiana Jones and Tron and Dune and The Last Starfighter and Goonies and Labyrinth and all the rest of the seedlings of fandom. Ooh, I like that. The seedlings of fandom. I've never heard that before. That's a good term. What seedlings of fandom were planted in your brain? I remember he took us to the Road Warrior. Oh man, that would have been so great. I was probably 8 and my brother 6. He thought it looked cool, but he thought it looked cool and was mortified by the violence and what he was subjecting us to. At least that's what he still says to this day. Now, did we get up and leave? Of course not. So maybe not all that mortified. There's boobies in the Road Warrior too. There was fornication going on in a tent that gets pulled aside, and you see a woman stand up, and that would have been great when I was 8. So maybe not all that mortified, and I'm sure there were no lasting formative impacts. Probably on the contrary. There were good lasting impacts. We went to all the classics of the day, as well as from Chariots of Fire, didn't really get that one until much later, to Terms of Endearment, to The Natural, one of the greatest endings ever. Also that piece of music, dun-dun, dun-dun-dun-dun, it's so good. So movies were kind of our thing, and some thought that it was foolish that with limited time with us that my dad would waste all of his time at the movies. But we know better, don't we? Yes, we do. Especially that when you go to the movies, you got to go get something to eat afterwards, which is always good. Sometimes movies can act as here escapism. As here escapism? That's what you wrote. But for me, they more often than not went beyond just entertainment. They presented different worlds, Different people living different lives, different ideas to intrigue and challenge and rail against, and most importantly, emerged in my young mind as an art form I could embrace and that would have a lifelong impact. My dad and I, he's living a state away, will still get on the phone and shoot the bull about the latest films. I've reared my own kids on the movie-going experience as well. Yes, they have streaming in the same way as we had Blockbuster, and those are decent enough in their own rights, but always mere ways of getting our movie fixes in between theater visits. But I digress. We started them early in the theater, though they were always much more into animated fare than I was growing up. No Mad Max for them. But the first live-action movie they allowed me to get them pumped up about was The Avengers. After that, they became MCU junkies. Man, that must have been so great having kids to take to see The Avengers. I would have loved that. After that, they became MCU junkies, going back and watching the rest of Phase 1 and then hanging on every bit of Marvel news from that point on. We'd always snag Thursday night tickets in the Dolby Theater to every Marvel movie, and they would excitedly try and go and espouse the movie's greatness to friends at school the next day who just didn't care quite as much. Welcome to fandom, kids. So many great memories in the theater. By the way, that was not me editorializing it. He wrote, "Welcome to fandom, kids," and man, he's right. So many great memories in the theater, and then especially upon leaving the theater, excitedly processing all we just experienced together. Experiences that are now put on hold. I've got a decent home theater set up, most of the streaming channels, so we enjoy our share of movies and TV at home. But come on, man, it's just not the same. There's this amazing chicken place we go to sometimes when we eat in, yo. It's piping hot, crispy, and delicious. And he did right. When we eat in, yo. When we order to go, the sealed containers capture all the moisture and make it kind of soggy by the time we get home. Now, it's still delicious after all. It's the same chicken and the same flavor, but just a bit different and lesser texture. That's how I feel about watching movies at home. It's great, but it's just not going to the theater great. I miss it, Rob, as I know millions around the world do too, and I wish for the movie-going experience to return with all due haste, and not just as a way to satiate our collective thirst, but as a way of celebrating our overall conquering of the current pandemic that besets us. Here's hoping for both of those things to come quickly. Well, what a lovely letter, Matthew. Thank you very much for that. I loved hearing about your father and you're sharing with your own kids the movie-going experience and getting them pumped. You know, there's a lot of things in this letter that I totally identify with. You know, my dad used to take me, my mom would take me to the movies, and they had a rule. It was, they would drive one way. If I could get a friend, I would get friends to go with me if parents could pick up. And I'll tell you, that was surprisingly more difficult than I thought it would be. Where I lived on a place called Mercer Island. I grew up on Mercer Island, Washington. And we would go into Bellevue. We never usually went downtown. If I wanted to go downtown to see a movie, I took the bus, which meant I had to wait for a weekend day because of school, unless it was the summer. So we would go to Factoria, usually Crossroads, and the John Dance. There was those three theaters that were in striking distance of home. You know, the furthest one out was maybe a 25-minute drive. But still, there's also, actually I'm wrong, there was the Overlake Cinemas as well. So there was Overlake, Crossroads, John Dance, and the Factoria Cinemas. Those are the four that we would go to. There were multiplexes aside from the John Dance, which is a giant big house. But my parents had that rule. We'll drive one way if you find somebody to pick up. Well, I would say I could find somebody to pick up maybe 60% of the time. And then, of course, I had to do negotiating because I really wanted to see the movie, and my dad knew that. So my dad and mom, to their credit, they were not so interested in movies, but they knew that I was fanatically interested in movies. So, and they also knew that they would never hear the end of it. When I was in Indian Guides, my dad hung the name Chief. My Indian Guide's name was Chief Running Mouth. If Dad was here today, if he could only see me now. But so I would not shut up about what movie was coming out. Like, I would talk about it. First of all, they had to listen to it for weeks before the movie came out. And then as I ramped up to the day of release, I can't even imagine what it was like to have to be my parents. to be when I was a kid. I can't even imagine, because I was obsessed, but I was very serious. So I completely relate. And I unfortunately didn't have kids of my own, which was sort of unfortunate, I suppose, because I'm rather kid friendly, being an aging man child myself, and people have tried to make fun of me for that. But it doesn't work, folks. I don't see that necessarily as a drawback. But what a great letter you wrote. So thank you for that, Matthew. But you know what? We will get movie going back. We will eventually defeat this. And I think, if nothing else, I think this whole experience has made people, I don't know, take a collective breath. Just stop for a minute and realize that, look at how quickly, especially living here in California, they made a decision. We're coming up on a month that we will have been, it'll be in a week, it'll be a month since the stay-at-home order, I think, went out. And, it's actually, to be honest, it's, aside from the stress level, it's actually been kind of nice. It's been, the air is cleared up, and people have sort of taken a breath, and in a way, maybe, hopefully we'll come out of this a little bit more mindful of one another, we'll be a little bit better off. And while, are people out of work, and has it wrecked the economy? Of course. Is it going to be difficult? For sure, no doubt. But in a way, maybe, look, everybody's going to want to snap back. I think everybody's going to work together, and hopefully things will get on track sooner rather than later. But we will have learned from this and move forward. So today would have been the day No Time to Die would have opened in theaters across North America. I would have gone to I had tickets for yesterday, but unfortunately, we'll have to wait. But we will see it. So we have to take solace in that. Maybe a quantum of solace. So thank you for that letter, Matthew. What a great letter that is. I very much appreciated that. And thank you for writing in. Let's see. What is next? I have another letter here. Yes, I do. Guess who I have a letter from? She's right there. Our woman in Sarajevo, Miss Sarajevo, as I like to say, Vesna Lukic. Vesna's here. Vesna is always here. Vesna has written another letter. Dear Robert, the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, it's been 20 years since the first official footage of the best movie trilogy ever. Sorry, Star Wars and Dark Knight, but it came online. I remember having a big problem to see it because my internet connection was dial-up. Remember that? And the shitty program Windows 95. And I was so thrilled when I stumbled at a Torn, what is that? Oh, a Torn Tuesday show, the official site of the Lord of the Rings fans, the One Ring, Tor, the OneRing.net. Of course, TORN. I've never seen it written that way. Okay, when I stumbled on at the OneRing.net Tuesday show, the official site of the Lord of the Rings fans the other day. That trailer was shown to the producers, but also the fans. Wow, so they have the very first, to celebrate 20th anniversary, the OneRing.net was very much, not really involved, but they were very aware of the work we were doing on the extended editions. They're great. What a great site. This happened even before they showed the footage at the Cannes Film Festival. It included not only some early shots of the movie, but also some work of pre-production, like design of the Shire and the costumes and prosthetics that were made by Weta, and I have to admit that it still looks amazing. In the show, I've mentioned before, the guests were co-producers Mark Ordesky and Rick Porras, as well as Richard Tyler, the head of Weta Workshop, and Jed Brophy, one of the actors, Gordon Pattinson, the head of marketing, whose idea it was to show that trailer, which is more like a video, to bring fans on their side. And I believe the name you recognize most, Michael Pellerin, Michael Pellerin was my boss at Curdy Pellerin on all the special features, who worked on the appendices of the movie. He also told very interesting stories. At that time, when the first video was put online in early April of 2000, he was actually working for Disney. I was working for him then. I was actually at Curdy Pellerin at April of 2000, working or maybe not April of 2000. I started later in 2000. It was the summer of 2000, I think. He was actually working for Disney, so they all went around the computer, even the head of Disney at the time, to see it. And after that, they all said New Line has a winner. Now, as far as I know, that was the first time something like that had been done, showing the unfinished piece of a movie to the public. Back at that time, the trailers were shown only in theaters, and that was maybe a month before the actual release. And I think that was an excellent marketing maneuver. Do you think something like that could work today with the property that is not well known to a wider audience, like Dune, for example? Mr. Pattinson said that the purpose of that was not just to ensure to the fans who knew the book that they have nothing to worry about, but also to interest those who know nothing about the property. And also, the producers of New Line, as well as Peter Jackson himself, wanted to record everything that's happening behind the scenes, which are now known and very much loved, the appendices. So, Robert, now here's the question for you. How you got involved with all that work? Was it because of your previous work with Pellerin or something else? I think many of the Post-Geek Singularity members would like to hear that. I know I would, and also Willow, who is the biggest fan of Lord of the Rings. Best regard, Vesna. I didn't know that. That's really interesting that the OneRing.net did that. The OneRing.net, in my mind, is one of the great, if not the greatest, fan sites on the web. I mean, I think about other fan sites that are also great, like Trek Core is an amazing Star Trek website. It might be my favorite Star Trek website. Memory Alpha is different because it's more of a information, but Trek Core has been consistently a great website. But the OneRing.net to me is the granddaddy of all fan websites, and they're fantastic. And of course, they when Peter Jackson won all of those Oscars for Return of the King, where was he going to the OneRing.net party afterwards? So how did I get involved? Your question is, how did I get involved? Well, so I was working at NBC, and I had known Michael Pellerin. His company, Curdy Pellerin, Jeff Curdy and Michael Pellerin, had teamed up with a guy named Phil Savinick, who had another company called TV is OK. And Phil's TV is OK had this great, really crazy office with all these old televisions in it in the middle of Hollywood. I mean, right there in the middle of Hollywood. So I had known Michael for years. And he called me up and said that they were transitioning over from doing all of the big white. If you didn't collect Laserdiscs, there were these beautiful, when I say box sets, literally they came in these big white foil embossed boxes. Disney had been doing those things, like for Tron and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Snow White. And Michael had been working on those. Jeff Curdy and Michael and Phil had been creating those special features for Laserdisc. Now, when DVD started to really take off in 98, 99, 2000, they were transitioning over and they were creating those special features for now DVD. And Curdy Pellerin, I don't know if Curdy Pellerin had been formed separately or it was formed later, but it was TV is OK and Michael and Jeff. And Michael had called me up like out of the blue and said, we're doing Fantasia, and I know that you love Fantasia. Would you want to come work on it? I was like, would I? So I went to work on what was called at the time the Fantasia Anthology, and it was a box set that was going to have Fantasia 2000, and an extra disc of special features. And I specifically was doing a piece on the visual effects of Fantasia, because there was a lot of, believe it or not, physical effects created that were later animated, rotoscoped for Fantasia, and they were all created by a guy named Herman Schulteis. And Herman Schulteis had this book It was amazing. That was discovered by his widow. Herman Schulteis like went on a fact-finding mission and disappeared in South America or something. But his widow, or the book was found in his house decades later, and he had meticulously documented everything with like frame grabs and literal frames and things that showed how all of the visual effects were done in Fantasia. And so I did a piece. Michael had me do a piece. It was the first piece I ever did for DVD after the documentary. My friend Jeff Goldsmith shot a bunch of documentary footage, and Scott Hyman worked on Free Enterprise, and then I had cut their footage together in a documentary that appeared on the Free Enterprise disc. But that was the only thing I had done for DVD. I had worked at Full Moon doing special features even back into '93, but so Michael called up and said, "Well, do you want to work on this?" So I did this piece on Herman Schulteis, and then he said to me, he goes, it'd be great to have you as part of the team. I had finished working on Free Enterprise, and I had got a job at NBC. So I was what was called a predator. I was a producer editor at NBC, and I had started out. They had hired me to do a spot on for Black History Month for the 2000 Olympic Games in Sydney, which they were calling the Complete Olympics. So I was working at NBC, and then I was working on the Fantasia anthology at the same time. So I would go to NBC and I would work at NBC from like 9 o'clock to 7 at night. Then I'd go into Hollywood and work from like 8 till 4 in the morning. And I'd go to sleep for like 4.5 hours and get up and go back to work. And I did that all summer. And I want to say that was the summer of 2000. Man, I was exhausted. but I was doing that. So then when we were done with Fantasia at the end of the summer. Yeah, it was like at the end of the summer. It was the summer of 2000. A couple months ago, and I couldn't, I had to work at NBC and there wasn't anything right away. So what was very funny was I go into work, and I'd been at NBC after the Olympics were over. I'd been promoted, and I was in their primetime campaign. I was working on primetime advertising for their new shows and stuff NBC was doing. The XFL cheerleaders, I did those commercials. And one day I go into work after being there for like 10 months, and they said to me they cut 10% of the workforce at NBC, and I was the only person in the department that didn't have a contract. And I didn't even know you could have a contract. It never occurred to me. I was hired to do one spot, and they just kept me there for 9 months and then bumped me upstairs. So I'd been there for, I think, 11 months almost. And I was like, oh, and I literally go home, and I was getting married. It was right before I got married. And I'm like, what am I going to do? I just moved into a more expensive apartment in Hancock Park, and I'm like, renting this guest house. And literally, I had been laid off for an hour. I went home, and I was sitting in my new apartment, newly decorated. It looked great. It was a guest house. And I'm thinking, I'm getting married in a couple of months, and I just lost a very lucrative job. I was making very good money at NBC. And I'm sitting there, and literally, I'd been home for 30 minutes, and the phone rings, and it's Michael Pellerin. And he says, hey, man, we really need you to come to work. What can I do? Can I convince you to come to work here full time? And I was like, of course I didn't want to say anything, but I'm like, you can't look a gift horse in the mouth. And I really liked working on DVDs, and DVDs were exploding. So doing documentaries for DVDs, I mean, I'd made Free Enterprise, it had come out, we won festival awards, we traveled all over the world, but the one job that I was going to get, which was Dude, Where's My Car, I didn't get. I've told that story before. So I called him back. I waited, and I said, sure, dude, I'd love to come to work with you full time. Now, I wasn't making nearly as much money there because there wasn't the kind of money you had at network television. But so I go to work, and the first thing I worked on with Michael when I was there full time, allow me. Was this. I worked on, this was the first disc. I don't know if you can see it because I'm blocking my screen. This is, of course, the Emperor's, can you see? Yeah, I can put up. This is the Emperor's New Groove special edition DVD. This was a great set, and I mean, if you look at how many special features, these are the kind of special features that we were doing for the Disney stuff. I mean, it was huge. And these days have long since ended, unless you look at the back of the Hills Run Red disc. So this was the first disc that I worked on when I was a full-time employee for Michael Pellerin. And after that, then there was multiple titles going on. And I remember him taking me aside one day, and Michael's like, I can't tell you. And no, Michael was a huge fan of fantasy thing. And he loved Disney stuff. He loved 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which was like his favorite thing in the world. And he loved Tron, and he had done the box set of Tron. And he loved Lord of the Rings. He loved Tolkien, and he was just a fanatic. I think in another, he's one of the Astari. He fancied himself a modern day Gandalf anyway. So I remember him telling me, he's like, they're making Lord of the Rings. I go, I know. He goes, I think we're gonna get to do Lord of the Rings. Now he, it's Disney only. We were just Disney only. I'm like, but yeah, it's New Line. He goes, yeah, but it's like my favorite thing. And he had an inn. His housemate was apparently a lawyer at New Line or something, so he had an inn, and obviously he was already doing the best work in the industry at that time. There was nobody that was beyond. I mean, Curdy Pellerin was so far beyond any other DVD company, and there was a lot that were popping up, but he'd been doing special features for Disney for a long time, so we're there, and I'm like, well, that'd be pretty dope if we got Lord of the Rings. And he was, for a long time, there was just whispers, pss, 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 pss. And it happened. He was able to get Lord of the Rings, and it was incredible. So we were working on Disney stuff. I want to say, I don't know if I'd started working on Tron yet. I might have been working on Snow White. Do I have that up there? I don't. I got to get Snow White, man. I don't have Snow White. I was working on Disney Through the Decades, which was a thing I was producing for the Snow White DVD. And we got Lord of the Rings. And it was, I'll never forget, what he wanted to do was so ambitious with the appendices and all that. And it was insane. I mean, it was crazy. And I think I was working on, I want to say I hadn't started Tron yet. I was working on Snow White. And then I was going to do Tron. So he was giving me Tron because I wanted to do, I've talked about it before, I did an 88-minute documentary that I directed and edited on the making of Tron for that film's 20th anniversary, which is in 2002. But it was a long time. We were working a year in advance. But then as Lord of the Rings was coming around, everybody at the company was going to work on something, and I did two pieces on the Fellowship of the Ring extended edition. I did the editorial piece, and I did digital grading. But then I also did some interviews. It was so funny. One day Michael comes into me and he goes, because they figured since I directed a movie and worked in film, they hadn't worked in film before. They just interviewed celebrities, and mostly it was Disney stuff. Michael comes in and he goes, what do you think of Christopher Lee? I'm like, dude, I love Christopher Lee. I've been watching him, hammer Dracula. He was on a Space 1999 episode. I love, he's Scaramanga, the man with the golden gun. Who doesn't love Christopher Lee? He goes, how would you like to go interview Christopher Lee? And I'm like, what? How would I like to? What, are you kidding me? Yes, I want to go interview Christopher Lee. And he goes, well, you're going to have to go to London. And I'm like, oh, twist my arm. And so I want to say that was the first thing that I did on the Lord of the Rings discs before I started editing. Maybe it was during. But so I guess people were scared. People were scared. Nobody wanted to interview Christopher Lee, and they knew that I wouldn't have a problem with that. And I'm like, are you kidding me? So I went to London. I stayed at the St. Martin's Lane Hotel, which became my favorite hotel in London. I've been back to London, 4 times? I always stay there. So I stayed at the St. Martin's Lane Hotel, and then we got a suite at the Dorchester Hotel. Now, because what you do is when you're interviewing celebrities, especially if you go to a foreign country, you need to make it as professional as can be. So we rented a suite in the Dorchester Hotel. I want to say we hired Special Treats, which is a company that shoots interviews and things. And we hired a professional makeup artist. And then I went to the Dorchester. And you never know how it's going to go with a celebrity. And I interviewed Christopher Lee for 5 hours. And it was unbelievable and amazing. And I'll tell this story. I've told this story before, but since you're asking, I'll tell it again. So when I was interviewing Christopher Lee, Attack of the Clones was going to come out. And there were posters for Attack of the Clones all over London. So I'm interviewing Christopher Lee. We're having a great conversation. And at one point, he stops. He goes, I am in the new Star Wars movie. I go, yes, Mr. Lee, I know. And he says, my great friend Peter Cushing, he was in the very first Star Wars movie. And I go, oh yeah. Well, I called Peter after I saw that film, and I was somewhat perplexed, and I said, Peter, you were just so awful to that awful to that lovely little princess, just terrible. Why would you have to be so terrible to her? And by the way, what is a Grand Moff anyway? And of course, Peter Cushing was Grand Moff Tarkin. And of course, Christopher Lee killed guys in World War II. I mean, he was an intelligence operative, and so we're having a laugh over that. And just hearing Christopher Lee, because he did have this voice. I mean, he was amazing. He was 6'5". Even though he was older, he was incredibly handsome, very charismatic presence, and he was so warm and so nice. And we had just a great conversation. And I said to him, I said, well, Mr. Lee, obviously Peter Cushing is no longer with us, but if he would be able to go see Attack of the Clones, and he called you, what do you think he might say? Now, I hadn't seen Attack of the Clones, but I knew Christopher Lee was in it and his character and stuff like that. I said, what do you think Peter Cushing would say to you? And it was very funny because he stopped and he thought about it. And he says, well, I suppose he'd want to know what a dooku now was, wouldn't he? And I thought that was very funny. I actually took that bit of footage and we sent it to Lucasfilm, but it was never used. It never saw the light of day. So I don't know. And then I interviewed John Rhys Davies after that for the same disc. And then for Two Towers, I was working on that exclusively. So I went back and forth, but I went to New Zealand for months at a time. And I interviewed, I must have done a third. Michael Pellerin, Susie Lee, and I split up the interviews in New Zealand. So we were there for months just interviewing people and recording the commentaries. And then on that piece, I just did the editorial piece because I was gathering, I was, I guess, the primary interviewer. Michael handled Peter Jackson and a lot of the cast, but I pretty much did everybody else. So it was an amazing time. I mean, I worked on those movies for 2 years. And what was really incredible is one night I'll never forget, we hadn't seen anything except the thing that you're talking about. And we were invited to New Line one night. We went down, we were in Hollywood, and New Line was, about really if no traffic, about 7 minutes away from our office. You just go down La Brea and shoot down Beverly. And we go in there and we saw the 20-minute can reel that they showed. And a lot of it showed us the Mines of Moria sequence, and it was mind-blowing. I mean, now everybody takes it for granted, but at the time, no one had seen anything like that before. And I want to say that can reel was shown in May of 2000 the movie came out Christmas 2001, so it was shown in May of 2001. So we probably saw it soon after, I think. And it was mind-blowing because nobody had ever seen anything like that before. And it was great. Boy, this was a long, protracted answer. But there you go. So there you go. And thanks for sending that in. I very much appreciate that. What a great letter. Now let's jump back to what you guys are saying in the chat. Wow, let me go back here. Stubble McShave says, Jordan Kahn is named after an author. Who can it be? That would be Robert Jordan, the author of the Wheel of Time series. First of all, you got to love that Stubble McShave. I don't think there's any human being on Earth who loves the Wheel of Time series more than Stubble McShave loves this series. Nobody. As a matter of fact, you know what that reminds me of, since it's Friday, and let me go down here. Let me go down into the Robservation archives here, and let me see. Oh yeah, here we go. Since Stubble McShave is always a big supporter. Let me see if I can do this. It's going to take a minute. Stubble McShave always supports the channel. He always writes in. In case you don't remember, here is a blast from the past of our boy. Oh, let me make sure. Hang on before I do this. I want to make sure that we're all good. Yes. Here's a blast from our past from our boy and Wheel of Time lover par excellence, Stubble McShave. Take it away.
Hello, Stubble McShave here. Sending in a video since Rob wanted us to do that for our show where I'm watching the show from. And I'm watching it from this chair, and I have this footstool. And when I'm doing a drinking game, I'm usually in the sofa because of the proximity to the table. And I'm watching it on my TV and comment on my phone. And I have some of my movies here and some of my books. Most are not here, they're in storage. I recently moved and a few bookcases were damaged in the move, so they're in storage. The only thing that's organized are my recently purchased Wheel of Time from Orbit. My old paperbacks were in bad shape. And of course I have the hardbacks, some of them here. The others are in storage. And yeah, some Christmas decorations are still up. And as Rob says, have a better day.
Oh yeah, blast from the past. Our boy Stubble McShave. I mean, I love getting letters from you, Stubble. Send me another video. But how cool is that? Always nice to hear from people, and it's always nice to hear from them again. So if you want a video on Robservations, send me one, and I'll play it. So yeah. Royce Freeman sends in a super chat and says, what do you think of the films Body Double, Blowout, Bowfinger, and The Player, which deal with filmmaking? I'm big fans of all four of those movies. As a matter of fact, I own Body Double, Blowout, and The Player on Blu-ray. I do not own Bowfinger, but Bowfinger is a great movie. I really have, it's fun. You know, I love movies about filmmaking. Some are better than others. Obviously, The Stuntman we watched on Whining About Movies, and all that jazz, which deals with making movies as well, is one of my favorite things ever. But yeah, I think those are great movies, and they deal with making movies in a different way. I mean, Body Double and Blowout are both murder mysteries, and The Player is about somebody that commits murder. But I think of all of those, they're all very different, by the way. But The Player really, from the studio experience, I was actually working at Warner Brothers when that movie came out, and I had read Michael Tolkin's book, The Player, before I had even seen the movie, so I was very excited for that. So I am a fan, Royce. I am a fan of all of them. So yeah. Brandon Valenzuela sends in a super chat. What were the worst and best interactions with celebs that you've had? That's a good question. Christopher Lee was definitely up there. I had a really great time working with Shatner on Usual Suspects, on Free Enterprise. I don't know. Have I had a bad experience with a? I don't really think I've had a bad experience with a celebrity. I can't. It really, I guess, because when I was 22, I just turned 22 when I worked on Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, and you learn quickly how to deal with celebrities in a way where you can show that you're not a crazy fan and you understand how to talk to them. So I've never really had a bad interaction with a celebrity. I will tell you a secret, I use this on Christopher Lee. Whenever I was doing DVD documentaries, and when you're doing a DVD documentary, you're usually talking to a celebrity after the fact. So they're not at a press junket. And if you can get somebody to come back to you and talk to you about a movie, like years after the fact, I was with Dave Parker, who I'm working with on Hills Run Red, who directed Hills Run Red. The first thing that Dave Parker and I ever did together that I was totally responsible for, Carrie David and I started our company, Endless Entertainment, and I got the Usual Suspects DVD to do. And the first interview that I was going to go do, and this is going to be my first celebrity interview on my own, was with Gabriel Byrne. And Gabriel Byrne, who played a character, obviously, in The Usual Suspects, the lead, I guess, Dean Keaton. He played the character of Dean Keaton in Usual Suspects. He agreed to be interviewed. And I was interviewing him. Again, we rented a hotel room at the Sunset Marquis. We got a suite. I also interviewed Bruce Logan, the DP of Tron, in that suite that I later went and worked with in Belize years later, strangely enough. So when I was interviewing Gabriel Byrne, I felt that because he wasn't there promoting something and he wasn't getting paid and it was his own time, that I needed to, you need to do something quickly. I needed to do something quickly to establish trust with him. So what I decided to do was I made it a point going, listen, before we start, I wanted to ask him a question, and I researched this. Like, what in his career is something that I found interesting about his career? Well, he was in Excalibur. He played Uther Pendragon in Excalibur at the beginning of Excalibur. So I said to him, I go, before we start, I got to say, I'm a huge Excalibur fan. And what was it like playing Uther Pendragon? And in his scene, he rides the dragon's breath to the castle, and he basically, he has a love scene, a sex scene in a full suit of armor with John Borman's daughter, who played Igraine, the woman he pretends he's her husband coming back from battle. And we talked about that, and he laughed. And he thought that was funny that I would ask him about that. And he goes, a lot of people forget that I was in Excalibur. And so we talked about it, but what I was able to do in that moment is to show him that I knew something about his career, which he liked, and he knew that I wasn't going to ask him a bunch of stupid questions. And we had a very long interview because of that. And I try and do that whenever I'm meeting with somebody, to be respectful. And it always has to be something, you can't just do that with anything. You have to truly love something, and you have to be able to speak about it extemporaneously off the top of your head, which I could do with him, and he could tell. So then we were off to the races. Now you might ask, well, did you do that with Christopher Lee? And the answer is yes. Right before, I want to say the week before I went to interview Christopher Lee, the great director Billy Wilder, who directed Double Indemnity that we talked about on Whining About Movies, Billy Wilder passed away. And one of the last things Billy Wilder ever did as a director was The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, where Christopher Lee played Mycroft, Sherlock Holmes' brother. And I asked Christopher Lee when we sat down, I said, listen, I wanted to offer my condolences about Billy Wilder, who passed away. Did you keep in touch with him? And he got all kind of misty-eyed. He said, I talk to Billy every week, and I miss him terribly. And by saying that to him, it was disarming enough that people will talk to you. So I have not had bad experiences with celebrities. I think I've been, here's the thing. Celebrities are just people, and they are doing a job. And if they know that you're doing your job as well, I've really had no problem. Now, there have been more prickly, like I once ran into Shia LaBeouf at a place called La Poubelle that's on Franklin. I used to hang out at La Poubelle all the time. It's a French bistro. I'd get Poubelle pints. Their beer was cheap. And one day he was sitting literally like right behind me, and the guy that I was with at the table with could see him, and my back was to him, but could see. And somehow there was some kind of static brewing between them. And this was right after Transformers 3 had got made. And the guy that I was with was getting angry, and you could feel something was. I turned around like as if I was getting up to go to the bathroom. I stopped and I said, he was turning around. He was looking at my buddy, and I don't know what was going on. I was like, "Hey man, you're Shia LaBeouf," and I said, "This is the best." I said, "My buddy, Charlie de Lazarica, he is doing the DVD for Transformers 3 or the Blu-rays, doing the special features, and said he was down with you at Cape Canaveral, and that it was amazing. He said it was just incredible, just seeing everything that was down there." And Shia LaBeouf was no longer mad, and he said, "Oh, it was amazing." And he goes, "Yeah, your friend Charlie, yeah." And we had a conversation. So whatever was brewing, I was able to diffuse it. But that was the closest it came. And then, once we were on the same subject talking about something that you give the floor to him, and it was diffused. So I haven't had a bad experience. Anyway, yeah. So there you go, Brandon. Willow sends in a tip and says, to clarify about the coronavirus movie that I mentioned earlier, the director says it's meant to depict xenophobia and the paranoia some people feel around Asians during this time. The acting in the trailer doesn't look good, in my opinion. Well, maybe that's an honorable thing he's trying to do. But yeah, if the acting isn't good, maybe that does no good for anybody. Who knows? Yeah, xenophobia. Yeah, but that at least that's honorable. Our boy Claude Hibbert is here with a couple of super chats. Bonjour, comment kava. Dig, if you will, this picture. A Star Wars film short with 3 3/4 Star Wars action figures voiced by Mark Hamill, complete with space battles. Just another quarantine content idea. Anyway, see you tonight. What is a bientôt? Claudius. Well, let me tell you, if you have not seen, I think action figure movies are great, and I think somebody who is killing it as far as action figures are concerned, my friend Mike Mendez, who directed Big Ass Spider and Don't Kill It with Dolph Lundgren, The Grave Dancers. If you have not seen what Mike Mendez has been doing in quarantine with his action figures, he has the biggest collection of action figures of anybody I know. Every room of his house is full of them. It's amazing. Go find his 8-minute short he did about going to war with action figure Guillermo del Toro, and his other piece he did on the Voorhees 5. If you haven't seen them, check them out. Find Mike Mendez on Instagram or Mad Mendez on Twitter. They're amazing. And Claude, it's not Star Wars, but it's along the lines. It's along the lines that you're talking about. It's amazing. Royce Freeman sent in a $5 super chat, and he says, "Can you give us a juicy story about your work on Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3? Okay. Since we're delving into Robservations in the past, I will tell you again another celebrity story that I haven't told in a while, but I'll tell it to you today because I've told this story a million times. As all of you know, I love George Romero's Dawn of the Dead. Like, I love it more than life itself. Well, maybe not that much, but I really love Dawn of the Dead. I really do. And thanks to a man named Bud Warner, I had a bootleg videotape of Dawn of the Dead long before Thorn EMI put it out domestically on home video. I had a bootleg tape, and it was pretty good. And I watched, it was on spread over 2 tapes, but I watched that bootleg of Dawn of the Dead as much as I watched Jimmy Fiddler's dad's bootleg Star Wars. I mean, we watch it a lot. I watched Dawn of the Dead all the time. That's why it was really the first bootleg videotape that I owned. Bud was also kind enough to give me things like, sorry, Mr. Bill Lustig, if you ever see this, but I had a copy of Maniac on VHS, a bootleg copy before it was released in Seattle. Don't tell anybody. Back in 1980. So I had Dawn of the Dead, and I love Dawn of the Dead. I've seen it a million times. So I get the job as the art department production assistant on Leatherface, and I find out that Ken Foray, who played Peter, the black SWAT officer, is in Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. And I'm like, I'm freaking out. Like the first movie I ever worked on, Viggo Mortensen and Ken Foree. I mean, obviously I didn't know much about Viggo Mortensen at the time because he had yet to play Aragorn. But Viggo Mortensen was in it. By the way, very nice guy. So Ken Foree was in this movie, and I'm just freaking beside myself. Now, as an art department production assistant, you don't have a lot of time to fraternize with the actors because by the time you're shooting, the art department's usually done. So, but when we were shooting at the farmhouse that we built behind Magic Mountain, we built this whole farmhouse behind Magic Mountain. The crew would eat at these picnic tables. This is a very idyllic site. And I was hoping against all hope that there'd be a time when I would be able to talk to Ken Foree. Now, I had never met a movie star in my life that I hadn't met really any celebrities yet. I'd have a few celebrity interactions in the first year I lived in LA, but really I met few at conventions or something like that. And I'd interviewed a few for my high school newspaper, like Helena Bonham Carter and Carrie Elwes for this movie called Lady Jane. And also Martin Brest, who directed Beverly Hills Cop and stuff like that. But not like this. And I didn't know what I was going to say, but I knew that when the opportunity arose, because I figured that Ken Foree must get up every morning and look at himself in the mirror as he's shaving or after the shower or whatever. He looks in the mirror and he must think to himself, I was in Dawn of the motherfucking Dead. Like, I'm thinking if I was in Dawn of the Dead, I would pretty much walk around all day long reciting my lines, thinking about what it was like to make the movie, how cool it was to have been in that movie, and I would pretty much be recreating Dawn of the Dead in my own mind forever. Well, Leatherface was filmed in the summer of 1989, a decade after Dawn of the Dead was seen. It played out over the country in 1979, so it'd been a decade. But still, I just figured, isn't that what movie stars do? Like, if you're in a movie that's so awesome, and of course he must have thought about it and thought it was as awesome as I did. And of course, having been in a movie like that, you must have watched it 100 times, because isn't that what celebrities did? Right? So I'm sitting there at lunch one day on set, on the farmhouse set, and Ken Foree sits right next to me. Right next to me at lunch. Like, literally, like, I'm sitting here, he's sitting like right next to me. And he always had a smile on his face. He's got that great voice. And he was just, everyone loved the guy. He was delightful. And, but it's businesslike on a set. It's not the kind of place where even though you can do chit chat at lunch, even then actors are still thinking about if they got work to do later in the day. They'll be cordial and everything. It's like a gypsy caravan. That's what making a movie's like. So I have to be cool. And he said something, and I turned to him and I said, Mr. Foree, my name is Robert Burnett. I am the art department production assistant. And, he's very gracious. Hey, how are you? I mean, obviously I'm a peon, but I'm still on the movie. So most celebrities, most stars, no matter how big they are, if you're part of the film crew, they're pretty cool with you. At least there's some people that aren't, but for the most part, especially on lower budget horror films, everybody's cool. And I tried to be all as, hey, I'm still the art department production assistant. I was probably laying it on a little thick. But I figured this is the moment. This is the moment I'm going to bro down with Ken Foree, and I'm going to show him how much I know about Dawn of the motherfucking Dead. Because it's like my favorite movie, and I'm going to make him understand. He's going to know. He's going to know exactly how much I know about this film, and then we're going to be fast friends, and we're going to be able to run lines together, and he's going to tell me funny stories about the making of the film and how basically over the last 10 years he's come to memorize every other character's part. Like, that's what I think's going to happen, right? This is my moment to shine. And I say, Mr. Foree, I'm a big fan of your work, specifically the work you did in Pittsburgh with noted genre and cult filmmaker George Romero. I, of course, loved you in Night Riders, and I especially enjoyed your performance in Dawn of the Dead. And I figured, come on, the floodgates are going to open. That was my best shot. That was my best opening line. I've never even been as good as at a bar trying to pick up the most beautiful woman in the place. I mean, I was there, man. And he's very respectful. He says, yes, I really enjoyed working with George, and it was really cold when we made that film. And then he turns back and finishes his lunch. And I'm like, aren't we going to run lines? Like, aren't you going to tell me funny stories from the set? Like, what? I mean, for him, it was a decade ago, an eternity ago. Celebrities don't watch the movie. I mean, unless you're Norma fucking Desmond in Sunset Boulevard, you're not watching your old performances. You're moving on to the next role. Like Brent Spiner told me that he'd never seen an episode of Next Generation back when we were working on the Blu-rays. And you know what? I believed him. But there, it wasn't him shining me on. It wasn't him being a dick. He thanked me for the compliment, and he went back. He had 30 minutes to eat his lunch. He ate his lunch, and he was very nice about it. But I learned an important lesson then, and it is that the people that work on movies never have the same experience that we do as viewers who watch movies and internalize movies and make them a part of our head canon or whatever. They're just not the same. And it was very funny, and I was like dejected, but it wasn't that he was mean to me or anything. But he had no idea what I thought of Dawn of the Dead, and I tried to be cool about it, so there was no way he could have understood how much that movie meant to me, how many times I'd seen it, the fact that I could tell him, I could say every one of his lines of dialogue back to him. It's probably, by the way, best that I couldn't. But anyway, that was an important lesson to learn. And it's actually, I put it in Free Enterprise, and when we met Shatner, it was something that I was able to use. It was one of the most important lessons. I did a Robservations episode about it, one of the early episodes, and it was one of the most important lessons I learned working in Hollywood. Is that a lot of people, they do want to talk about what they've done, but you can't expect people that made things to have the same experience or understanding of you as a viewer and a fan, what it's like for you to have experienced those things, because it's very, very different. Anybody that's ever worked on a movie can never, if you haven't worked on a film, and I mean the film you're loving, I'm talking about, let's say you're a big fan of Escape from New York, your experience of, and you had nothing to do with the production, but you're watching Escape from New York, everything from every shot and every dialogue, the music and all that, that's a whole different experience than it is making the movie. And the people that made movies will never, ever, ever be able to appreciate or understand what you as a viewer feel about their films, because they can't look beyond the experience of what it was like to make the movie, so they can never watch the movie the way you can. And that was something I needed to understand. And that was what my experience with Ken Foray taught me. And that was, I think, the most important thing that I learned while working on Leatherface from Ken Foray. And by the way, years later, I think it was at a signing. It might have been for the DVD or something. I went to Dark Delicacies, and I got to see Ken Foray again, and I got to tell him that the story that I just told you, and he was like, "Oh man, I'm sorry." We had a good laugh about it. We talked about it, and he was so funny about it. He was like, "I wish I had known." And I'm like, "Dude, you were working, bro. I mean, seriously, you couldn't have known. They couldn't have known." And he's one of the nicest men in the world. And so there you go. There's my juicy. It's not really a juicy story, but that's my favorite story about working on Texas Chainsaw. I have a juicy story to tell, but I can't tell it on the show. It was interesting. Chairman Mao sends in a tip and says, relating to Matthew's letter on sharing movies with his kids, my kid's interest in movies has changed. When my son said he wanted to watch Lord of the Rings, I felt it was a turning point. Plus, he sat through all 3 extended editions, so kudos to him. Yeah, again, when somebody's interested in something and they come to you, it's different than if you try and foist it on them. Hey, look who is here. Victory Unlimited Show is here. Yes, indeed, Victory Unlimited Show is here. I don't know why. I just have to say it that way. I've always said it that way. I must say it that way always when Victory Unlimited Show is here. Hello, Victory Unlimited Show. Victory says, I've been watching old episodes of The Man from U.N.C.L.'s, Secret Agent Man, I, Spy, and The Avengers, and the theme songs are iconic. What are some of your favorite action hero spy TV movie themes? And is anything made today comparable? Well, I mean, I think the two greatest, if not, I mean, look, The Saint, everything you're mentioning, Avengers, Secret Agent Man, Man from U.N.C.L., those are iconic. But I have to say, I still think that the themes from Hawaii Five-0 and Mission Impossible are two of the greatest, and The Prisoner, Ron Grenier's theme for The Prisoner, are probably my three favorites. But there's a lot of good ones. I mean, definitely. But I don't think, you know what? I don't know if it's possible. You know, there's something about those themes that were larger than life, and people didn't have a problem with that. Like those themes, I think in a way, those themes, if the shows didn't live up to those themes, remember SWAT? Remember that theme from SWAT? Everybody should go to YouTube. If you don't know the theme from SWAT, the original theme from SWAT, that was awesome too. But I think that, I don't know if showrunners, I don't know if people are, those songs are so iconic, those pieces of music are so iconic, you would need a showrunner with some pretty big brass balls to come out and have a piece of music that had the kind of punch that the Mission Impossible theme had, or the Hawaii Five-0 theme had, or the Man from U.N.C.L., or Secret Agent Man, or I, Spy, or The Avengers, any of those things, because you would have to have the confidence that your show could back up that great of a piece of music. You know, if somebody like Lalo Schifrin is writing your music or something, your show better live up to that piece of music. And I don't know if people, because all of the shows that we have now, in a way, I don't know if we live in a time where those kinds of iconic theme songs would be supported anymore, if that makes sense. We live in a different era, and it's almost like those, in the 60s, it works. And the SWAT was obviously in the 70s, but nowadays, I don't know if producers or even audiences want that kind of thing. I don't know. But that's a really good question. By the way, thank you for the generous support of the channel. You're always so generous to the channel. Thank you for that. I don't know, man. That's a really good question. Yeah, I don't think there's any. I don't know if there is anything comparable. Because, again, you have to have confidence to get that cool. Nick Parrish sends in a tip and says, "What's up, Rob? Hope all is well, my brother. So I see the Trolls World Tour is not on AMC's on-demand service. I know that NATO has a beef with Universal's handling of Trolls, but do you think it is wise for AMC not to have given into it because of their financial situation?" I don't know. For what Nick is referring to, Trolls World Tour was going to be in theaters, and instead they've pulled it, and it's going to go straight to streaming. And of course, AMC, which may or may not be declaring bankruptcy, people are saying they might, but they haven't. AMC has made no announcement. I don't know. I don't know if it was even an option to put it on their streaming service. I'm not sure. But you know what? That wouldn't, even if it was on their streaming service, I don't think it would have helped them enough. It would have made a fraction of a dent in where they're at now. I mean, you're talking hundreds of millions in operating costs that they have to recoup, that they don't have, they can't pay anyone. So, yeah, I don't think it would make a dent, but it's interesting. Chairman Mao writes in and says, "Also, when I was watching Fellowship, I realized how much better it would look in 4K in certain scenes, like the Council of Elrond, where it seemed the image looked pretty soft. The Two Towers and Return of the King Blu-rays did look better, though. Better transfers, maybe? Well, also, remember, it was also digital grading. The technology was advancing almost exponentially between those movies. And the Council of Elrond scene is heavily graded, and it has a lot of effects that they were caressing into the background. A lot of that was done green screen, so that's probably a lot of what that has to do, why you see that. And the problem is those movies were finished at 2K. I've heard that they're going to, they're doing, obviously they're working on 4K versions. I don't know how long it's going to take. I don't know if they went back to the original negative, but if Weta's doing it, they'll figure out some way to make them look spectacular. Throg is here. My man Throg, who according to Throg, we might have, I might be doing a little bit of an unboxing video soon. Throg Zombie Slayer sends in a tip and says, I just visited the summer of 1969. Rick Dalton was the man, and his producing partner and his former private stuntman Cliff Booth really saved the day. I have a friend who's watching. Would you be a dear and ask Marty wait a minute, hang out. Marty McFleece? Would you be a dear and ask Marty McFleece to reach out? Thanks, Trog. Well, Marty McFleece, your friend Throg would like you to reach out, but if you want him to reach out because you're a zombie slayer, you don't want him to reach out because Marty McFleece is a zombie, because I don't want you to slay Marty. Hope that's not the case. Francisco Metaliana. Hey, what do you want to see most in The Batman? What makes you excited for Matt Reeves' take? Thoughts on Pattinson? Woo, okay. I think Robert Pattinson has grown into be a very fine actor. I think he's going to be a great brooding Batman. I have no problem. I mean, to say that he's the guy from Twilight, I'm like, God, the guy worked for Cronenberg. Not in one of his better movies, but still worked for Cronenberg. I mean, Good Time. He's done some great work. I think Robert Pattinson's going to be a great Batman and surprise a lot of people. So I'm looking forward to that. And I just want to see a different take. I want to see what Matt Reeves brings to it. It looks like he's going to concentrate more on the real world aspects of the Dark Knight detective. I mean, we'll see how it all goes, but I'm very confident that what we're going to get is going to be something special, and I'm really looking forward to what he's going to bring to the role. Zachary King sends in a tip and says, like you, I'm very intrigued by devs. Sonia Mizuno is beautiful. Alex Garland apparently loves shots of sprawling cityscapes. Also had some in Dread. Also, when can we expect the JBL soundbar review? Well, Zachary King, I loved devs. I'm loving devs. I mean, there's one episode left. If there's ever a time I want to be my mind blown by the last episode of a series, I would love that to happen with this. I think Sonia Mizuno is a great talent. It's very interesting. She's an incredibly beautiful woman, and she's really downplayed that on this show, which I always respect. I mean, she was in La La Land, and she was in she was one of the robots in Ex Machina that Oscar Isaac had in his employ, or in his, not employ because he created them. But I think she's great. And boy, can I not wait for the end of the show. I really cannot wait. But yes, he loves cityscapes. I have been asked to hold off on my JBL soundbar review because the soundbar is not coming out until the 31st of May. So I'm going to drop my soundbar review in probably like around my birthday, May 15th, I think. I'm trying to see if I can hook up some kind of a giveaway for the channel regarding that. We'll see. I don't know yet if I can. I've been very impressed with the soundbar. The only thing that I have to look into is the rear channels when they're undocked. And this was probably something. Anytime something is wireless, sometimes there's moments when the signal gets a little crackly, and I got to figure out why that is. But other than that, the performance is very impressive. We were listening to The Great Beauty when we were watching The Great Beauty last night. The sound design in that film is great, and the opening party scene is bumping. And when the sub kicks in and the rears kicked in, it was sounding great. I'm very impressed. So yeah. Mukbang Review sends in another super chat and says, great stories today. Thanks as ever. Well, Mukbang, I want to thank you for supporting the channel. All Metal Mike sends in a super chat and says, Rob, I saw Dawn of the Dead in downtown Philly where I grew up. It was the first movie I attended where the audience yelled at the actors on screen. Man, I would love that. I first saw Dawn of the Dead at the UA 70, right next to the UA 150, where I'd seen Star Wars and Alien. Man, it was so great. Ugh. Anonymous tips and says, Lancelot Link had a great theme song. That's very funny. Fred Stanford Throg sends in a tip and says, dude, Sanford and Son, Red Fox, epic no-shows by Red because of pay. Come on. You've lost all gangster 1970s cred. Yeah, but I wasn't thinking of Sanford and Son as like a spy movie. You know, I love Stanford and Son. I loved all that. Red Fox was the best. And you had, if you were growing up in the 70s, but I was thinking more along the lines of spy films. But yes, Sanford and Son's classic. Anyway, isn't Sanford and Son like, if memory serves, hang on, let me check this out, because there was a bunch of shows. Let me get this right. Let's see, Sanford and Son. There was 3 different spin-off show attempts from Sanford and Son. They all have lost episodes. The first was called Grady, with actor Whitman Mayo, played his old man character of the same name as the series, and it focused on his family. 10 episodes and was canceled. Episodes 1 and 2 were uploaded to YouTube. The second was called Sanford Arms, made in 1977, starring Theodore Wilson as an old friend of Fred Sanford. The show ran only 4 episodes. And the third was a revival of the original series, simply called Sanford, because of actor Desmond Wilson did not wish to come back as Lamont Sanford, while Red Fox did as Fred. It lasted 2 seasons with 26 episodes. All have not yet been found online or released, except for limited runs on the BET network. I knew that. I thought that. Now, Sanford and Son rules. I'm all about it. Good call. Good call, Throg. Good call. Now, I've got this. This will be the last letter for today. What a rollicking show this turned out to be. I think I should have a drink, though, before. This letter comes from Anthony Choice. This was a letter that was sent, and then it was revised and resent. Greetings, Darth Robservations. Darth Robservations. Here's a story from a long time ago, in a country far, far away. A long one, but I assure you, it's worth it. Following the release of Return of the Jedi in 1983, it stayed in circulation for quite a while, particularly in the international marketplace. When the film came out, like every other American kid, I went to see the movie repeatedly, right up until it was no longer in the theater. A disappointment, to say the least. So imagine my surprise when I discovered that El Regreso de Jedi. Jedi is pronounced Jedi, like Yeti in Spanish, or at least it was back then, in adverts and otherwise, had only just arrived in the theaters of my family home of Honduras. It was the summer, and like several trips prior, I had come back to the mom's country of birth to visit and reconnect with my family. At that age, I had grown comfortable enough while returning home, as it were, that I no longer felt like an alien, no pun intended, in a foreign land. 1983 Honduras was the center point of Ronald Reagan's Contra Wars. Note the plural. From the hub of the U.S. Embassy in Honduras' capital city, Tegucigalpa, characters like John Negroponte put death squads, destruction, and low-intensity warfare to work, becoming the currency Hondurans employed within and exported to every country around it, specifically Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Guatemala. Considering I was still a child, I didn't understand these nuances, obviously, but I have vivid memories of everything I experienced, like the absent police force in Capital City and seemingly everywhere else I look had been replaced by PMs, Policia Militar, military police, carrying second-hand fully automatic rifles and uniforms supplied by the U.S. Defense Department. PMs manned every street corner, sometimes behind sandbagged machine gun nests. The car bombing that occurred down the street from where I stood with my mother, leaving everyone on edge and afraid. The military checkpoints, set up every 1 or 2 miles, not just in Honduras, but in El Salvador and the Pan American Superhighway. At each checkpoint, you were stopped at a gate that had to be raised, shaken down for your ID or passport, and a bribe you had to pay to get through. These were there as a precaution to catch guerrillas. We know now this was a tactic borrowed directly from British control techniques of a then-occupied Northern Ireland. In reality, however, each stop was a small island of intimidation with a machine gun nest sitting atop a toll booth between two armed guards looking to line their pockets. They weren't catching guerrillas. They were stealing the little wealth with their countrymen. They were stealing the little wealth their countrymen possessed, impoverishing them even further. And those were the lucky ones. The unlucky ones never saw home again. These are a handful of the examples of what I saw. My family in Honduras is part of the political class. My great-uncle-cum-grandfather, at whose home I was staying, ran for the office of president in the 50s and was, at the time, the Chief Justice of their Supreme Court and remained one of the most respected and trusted figures in the country. As such, this gave me both some social latitude and mobility as well as access. Not that I knew what to do with any of it at that age. It was, nonetheless, there. Upon my arrival in the capital city, I was warned that I was to go nowhere without my U.S. passport, and was even coached that should certain situations arise, that I was to speak only English and not Spanish, so as not to be mistaken for a local. The reason being, young boys, teens, and men were often rounded up and taken off the streets and drafted into the army. Boys as young as 10, pressed into service for no crime but being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The problem is, when abuse of power is arbitrary, everywhere and every when is the wrong place at the wrong time. Every morning I would walk a block or two from my uncle's home to get fresh fruit, particularly green mangoes, which we eat with a bit of salt and seasoning. I was never a fan of the ripened mango. They're messy and sticky, while green ones with the salt were perfect to my palate. It was during one of these walks that I realized that the building I'd been passing every day was actually a movie theater. I hadn't noticed this because it had been pouring rain for several days, and I never actually saw the "Now Playing" sign from under the awning upon which it was mounted. Nor could I easily discern that this was a movie theater, considering its corner entrance, like the whole block itself, was sandbagged and occupied by a mixture of PMs and regular army, at arms for some pending imagined assault. But that one day, due to an overly large puddle, I had to walk out into the street so as to not end up wading up to my ankles. From this new vantage point, there it was, in glorious letters, El Regreso de Jedi. Yes, sir, it was Return of the Jedi. That movie that left theaters back in the U.S. and left me mourning its disappearance. I was elated. I realized that I had been gifted another chance to binge on Luke, Han, and Leia doing their due. Afterward, with every family visit, someone would inevitably ask me, "Is there anything you want to do today?" And of course, my response was, "Vamos a ir por el cine?" Want to go to the movies? Have you seen Return of the Jedi? No, I haven't. Have you? Me, Cheshire grin squeezed to tight lips and clenched jaw. No, I haven't. Let's go see it. Through childish guile and chicanery, I convinced one family member after another to take me to see the movie no less than 15 times. On my time, I was just so young I needed an escort. What I didn't understand was the broader scope and implications about what I was doing. The wisdom to have recognized the body language and reticence of my various cousins, with whom I went to the movies, was simply beyond my comprehension at the time. I failed to register the warnings of how the army had more than a few times walked into the movie theater and shut down the film and just plucked those young men and truants right out of the audience into a life in the military. My cousins had every right to be nervous. They were literally putting their lives on the line to indulge my innocent interests and naivete. But they also knew the first film I ever remember going to a theater to see was Star Wars in 1977. Later, I latchkey kidded my way through my mom's work hours watching laserdiscs of projected Star Wars or Time Bandits ad infinitum. When it was released on broadcast, not home video, I used to help my mom teach English to her ESL students at the high school at which she worked, a key tool of which became Star Wars. She'd show it regularly to her class, and since she knew I'd be transfixed by it, would bring me, only to, on the spot, translate the movie to teenagers who I likely would end up being babysit by. While I was still just learning to read myself, I was teaching people to read, talk, and understand English by way of Ben Kenobi. But back to Central America. It was many years until I thought back upon this time period and the particularities of it. Where I couldn't then understand the squirming and evasive eyes and awkward, uncomfortable silences my cousins would have during the film, I gleefully watched Lando and the rest of the Alliance take on the Imperial fleet and the ever-imposing Death Star. What I didn't know I was doing, was forcing a rebellious document, an act of dissidence and revolutionary messaging upon my family in a climate held in place under the conditions of direct military occupation, martial law, active repression, and violence. I realize now that after those film conversations were inquiries about my own thoughts and opinions on the political contrast of our lived reality versus film fantasy. They raised questions about the value and principles of resistance and of compliance under imperialist rule. When my cousins returned home, inevitably conversation devolved into real-world ramifications, and to some extent an excitement at this movie their much younger cousin had just coerced them to see. A high-speed spectacle of clashing sabers, screaming TIE fighters, and a roaring Millennium Falcon that made me keep returning to Lucasland again and again were minor elements in a story about a direct correlation to the cinema they had seen and what they'd encountered every time they stepped outside. To say conversation got lively is an understatement, and to put things in perspective, I should describe their theater experience. Star Wars hadn't been the sensation there it had been everywhere else. Many didn't even know what it was about, so why would they see it? They weren't bred on a steady diet of Star Wars toys and comic books like I was. 85% of the time, we were one of a handful of people in the theater actually watching the movie. Sometimes it was only us. People were too afraid to attend movies. They'd all heard the stories about the forced army draft and other antics. You had to walk through heavily armed guards in full military fatigues, rifles at the ready, to even walk toward or walk into the door of the cinema. Little by little, my silver screen virus spread. I started hearing how my cousins had told their cousins or siblings, and they started venturing to see the movie, only to be excited by its liberatory themes. Quietly and obviously, our own rebellion in thinking and imagining was brewing in my extended family. At one point, toward the tail end of my stay, one of the guards, all extremely young men of course, when his peers were out of earshot, asked me about the film. "You must really like this movie. You come here a lot, like almost every day. What is it?" I didn't get into a deep banter about the film, but it helped that some of my female relatives were just the right age to catch his eye when we went to see Jedi in groups. He wanted to know where all the teens were going. The armor and the uniform softened. For the first time, that kid in that uniform was coming out, and childlike curiosity was re-emerging. Later, I found out he did see the movie, and he really liked it. It made him think. Something he hadn't really done prior to that, because life then seemed so predetermined and cynical, so why bother? Because the one thing it actually lacked was hope. And with hope comes the ability to have joy, something that had seemingly evaporated from everyone's faces. Strangely enough, in this particular case, Empire had fed the seeds of its own demise by letting some American schlock, in their opinion, play in their theaters. Cinema was not a thing when one can go out drinking instead. But one little kid who loved X-Wings can, without knowing, change the minds and spark hope in the people who had forgotten how to do both. That, as you know, is the power of cinema. This power is as much circumstantial as it is artistic. I tell this story to you, and have often repeated it to the younger members of my family, recounting how close to 40 years ago seeing a movie made waves, because since the coup in 2009, hope and idealism have been under assault in Honduras. Now the democratic dictatorship Honduras has become looks much like it used to back then, only worse. Yet something like Star Wars, or the justice and freedom-ridden themes found in the superhero fare, can have huge impacts if respected and left to do their work. It's not a cure-all or magic bullet by any means, nor the shot heard round the world, but through the veil of pop culture, sometimes Hollywood and geek Imagineers can do something right that isn't just about box office receipts. That's my story. I don't think there's a lesson there that yourself or your audience don't already know. But to me, in these times, when things are so divisive and all too bleak, I remember that kid. A kid who just wanted to imagine himself in the cockpit and sparking a lightsaber, losing himself in the pure joy of a space adventure. And in so doing, unintentionally made it safe for others to do the same. When the powers that be handle these IPs with nothing but ever more calculating indifference, they sell themselves short and forget that cinema is and can be more than just box office, and always has been. Now in my 40s, that little kid still continues to inspire. He inspires me to always remember the magic, what is possible, and savor those 90 minutes in the dark, but also to remember every movie ends, and that what really matters is how it begins a conversation between people that never ends if we only let it do its thing. So, Robert and the Post-Geek Singularity, thank you all for being a voice out there, keeping the conversation going by spreading the magic. Anthony, the San Joe Bandito, and still dreaming to be a Jedi. I'm all verklempt reading this letter, to be honest. Anthony, I can't thank you enough for writing this letter. This is exactly what this show is all about, and that's what the Post-Geek Singularity is all about. And I always too. I mean, I could talk about the power of imagination, but I don't think anyone has ever put it as succinctly and as clearly and as graphically as you have with this lovely letter. And I want to thank you for writing it. I am humbled that you would send something like this to me. So, wow. Thank you. Thank you very much. There's a few more chats here. Mukbang Reviews sends in a couple of super chats, and he says, even though his royal badness is long gone, would you ever go to Paisley Park to see what it was like? I recommend it. I'd love to go to Paisley Park. I've wanted to go there very much. And Mukbang continues and says, please consider joining John early. His voice is dying. Hour 5 of his telethon. Thanks to the both that what you do. The live chat has spoken. Well, listen, after Anthony's letter, I can't think of a better place to end Robservations number 388 than right here. I will go jump over to see John. And again, Anthony, what a fantastic letter, and I want to thank you for choosing to share that with me. I've often said, I mean, I've never quite articulated it this particularly this way, but you pretty much nailed it. And what a tremendous story. I didn't know if this episode of Robservations was going to be any good, quite frankly. I always worry that if I don't have something interesting to talk about, but hearing about Corona zombies and then starting with that and ending with this, I mean, if nothing else, maybe movies and flights of fancy and things that we love as the Post-Geek Singularity are more important than we all know. Who would have thought that dragging your not only could go see, not only is going to see Return of the Jedi a defiant act, but a dangerous act. Amazing. Thank you very much for that letter. And thanks to everybody who writes letters. And if you want, you can send me a letter and a video, to the Burnettwork.net. And if you want to save them, send me videos for the 400th episode, which is probably, if I keep going, it'll be on April 23rd. And I'll probably do it from the noon to 8. Or not. I mean, I'll do 400 minutes, which is not quite... it's not quite 8 hours, so I'll do 400 minutes. But, yeah. So, again, I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank you for supporting the channel, whether it's with letters, whether it's super chats, tips, anything, videos you guys send in, guys, girls, gentle beings, members of the Post-Geek Singularity, whoever you may be. It's been great during this time. It's been very inspirational to be doing these shows, and I'm glad people are still coming. Tonight, we are doing Whining About Movies. Elizabeth and I will be talking about The Great Beauty, which is sort of thematically a companion piece in a way to La Dolce Vita, another movie set in modern Italy, and it's going to be fun to discuss it. It was a movie that I think I liked a lot better than Elizabeth did, but we shall see. We will be back for Whining About Movies tonight at 8 o'clock Pacific time, so join us there. I want to thank all of the people watching, all of you imagination connoisseurs. I want to thank my moderating staff, beginning with Mike Bodden, and then, of course, Detective Jim Boyers and the great Greg Smith, who is still building a 1-to-1 scale snowspeeder from The Empire Strikes Back. Who knows where it will eventually appear, but it will be someplace, and you will be able to see it. And then, of course, Louis Yu and Geordie Lyons, which round out the moderating staff that makes this such a pleasant place to be. And I will say, every person you meet, as evidenced by Anthony's letter, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. And with that, I will say to everyone, as always, and I will be back at 8 tonight and back tomorrow, have a better day.